Everybody, it's Karen from Divorce Workshop. Welcome back to our series with Shauna Warden. We're going to talk about surviving a high conflict divorce.
Yeah, good to see you too, and I'm glad that we're doing this. Is the fourth installment of Breaking Bad, Surviving a High Conflict Divorce, and this one's post-divorce abuse. But first, you want to introduce yourself just quickly?
Yeah. So I am Shauna Warden. I'm a divorce coach located in Richmond, Virginia. And yeah, so unfortunately, you and I have a lot to say about post-divorce abuse.
Yeah, I said that while I was waiting for you, but I wanted to mention, like, for me, I think you're about 8 years, I'm 7 years post. And I want to start this conversation off to ask you if you also felt naive. I had
Oh my God.
no idea, Shauna, that I knew intuitively I knew it was a high conflict personality I was dealing with, but I was so naive to think, okay, well, we'll just get divorced and it's all okay. Well, no, it's 7 years later, and it's the post-divorce, the way that I'm being abused is different than you're being abused, but it's all abuse, right? But
Yeah.
it's still here. Nothing's
Oh yeah.
changed.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to point out because we are smart,
Mhm.
educated, well-rounded women. And, the more that I learn about it, the more I know that those people like us tend to fall prey to this type of person. My point being, it's like, oh, she's so smart. Like, how did she not know
Hmm.
that this was,
Hmm.
going to happen? And it doesn't matter, what station in life you're at, it can happen to the best of us, right? And so, yeah, really naive. And, the divorce was bad enough, but the abuse didn't really start until after that was over. And so you think, okay, I've gotten through the hardest part of this, when really it's just the beginning.
Hmm. Yeah, it's just kind of, I think I trusted him thinking, well, he'll just be a moral
Hmm.
person. But I look back, and if because we've talked about this before, how much farther we are away from it now. But if you look back, and this is what I want our viewers to know, is that if you look back at their past behaviors, for a lot of them, it's not going to change, right? It's only going to get worse. I'm not going to say all of them, but they're
Hmm.
only they can get worse, right? So,
Yeah, because you're no longer in their vision. You're no longer right in front of them to
mhm.
control. And so now they are even angrier. It's like it beefs them up more, right? Like, to what lengths do I need to go to now to keep her under my spell? Right.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so if you have kids in the divorce, that's usually the most, prominent area of where they tend to control you. And so really just educating yourself and arming yourself with tools needed to survive it.
Yeah, and know that only you can control yourself. You can't control them, and
Yes.
that's kind of can get hard as you because they don't stop usually ever.
Right.
You're right. It
They
gets
don't
less,
stop.
but it doesn't.
They
Yeah,
don't stop. You get stronger
yeah. You
and
get stronger.
wiser.
Yeah, yeah. So I wrote a list. You know, with me and my list.
Yes.
But how many ways that post divorce abuse can show up?
Oh my gosh. So
Yeah,
many ways.
so many ways. So I just want to, we can start talking about, so you mentioned co-parenting, which we talked about in the last part three was it's not really co-parenting, it's counter-parenting.
Hmm.
So we talked about that, like they don't listen to co-parenting plans. They use their children as pawns, um, undermining your parental authority. They'll abuse by proxy or they'll parental alienation, however term you want to use. That's a pretty
Yes.
common one.
I heard there's a new term for it that
Is
I
it?
wrote down the other day. I'm like, can we stop renaming things? Because I
Yeah,
get
you can't
I
keep up
can't
with it
even
all.
remember now what it was, but anyway, there's a new term for parental alienation, and that's a big one. And
Yeah.
that is hard to to navigate because the courts don't help. Sometimes make it worse.
Yeah.
let's see, parent-child contact problems is the new
Oh,
term.
parent contact. And I just also want to mention that happens to both parents, because it can happen to dads as well as moms. It's not just a
Yes.
mom issue, it's a dad's issue.
Yes.
We could actually do a talk about that, because that's a pretty big
Yeah.
one. And it really, there's a lot of grief there, right? Because it's like ambiguous grief, we call it. But yeah, that's one of the ways that these high conflict individuals will use their children as tools.
Yes.
Another one is financial abuse, right? I had a client who was married to a doctor, and the doctor decided to work part-time because he didn't want to pay her anything or very, very little. So there's games like that can be played with financial, or they're underemployed.
Yeah. Yes, I was going to say that is a really prevalent tactic, is that they purposely underemploy themselves, or they have work, but it's not like W-2 work. It's not taxable, verifiable income. And so they're still maintaining their lifestyle, but they are not making a wage in order to pay child support, spousal support, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and just remember, when they're making cash, it's really hard to, how are you going to prove that, right? Like,
Yeah.
because it's all under the table. So it makes it even harder.
Yeah.
They'll hide assets or
Yep.
withhold assets. That's another one. And then another one is the emotional and psychological manipulation.
Yeah.
Which is pretty normal with high conflict people, such as sending threatening letters or messages, gaslighting, twisting events, public smearing, like, I'm sure you understand what that one is.
Yes, I just had a client this morning that said his neighbors were sending like Ring camera footage of him and his new girlfriend to the ex-wife, and I'm just like, it's so scary nowadays. You can't hide.
No, it's
You can't have any
cameras are
privacy.
everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also legal abuse, which is a big topic again, right? Because they'll just motion after motion after motion to try to wear you down, refuse to finalize divorce or make separation agreements. That kind of happened in my case. It's like changing the goalposts whenever they want.
Yeah.
Kirk said starting a business. Yeah, they can start a business. Yeah, starting a business.
Right.
Right. Requesting modifications to the agreements, right? Because you're like, you think you have it done, just like I said, changing the goalpost.
Yep.
That's pretty common. How about in boundary violations?
Oh yeah, they love boundaries, don't they?
Yeah, no.
Well, and I think that goes back to the core issue. Usually people who are married to narcissists, or high conflict, whatever you want to say, it's a match made in heaven, because usually one person has no boundaries, married to a person who respects no boundaries. And so it's just this tornado of toxicity, you know what I mean? And then as soon as the one without boundaries wisens up and learns that they need to start having boundaries, the other person who doesn't respect boundaries is like, wait a minute, you're changing the rules, you know what I mean? And so it does not cure itself overnight. But I think the first step is to establish some boundaries and be strong enough to uphold them. Anybody can say, oh, this is my boundary, but the real test comes when you have to follow through with that. And it is uncomfortable.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Yeah.
Especially for us people pleasers who we don't want to make anybody uncomfortable, even our horrible ex, right?
Yeah.
Because then you're just standing there like, okay, I said the thing, now what do I do?
Yeah. And a lot of times it needs repeating and repeating and repeating, and behavior too, right? Like it's not just telling them, it's also that you follow through with it, with your behavior, right?
Yeah. And my advice is let them be uncomfortable. That's uncomfortable for us. So everybody's uncomfortable, right? But you have to let them be uncomfortable. And
Yeah, I agree.
if you are uncomfortable, that probably means you're doing it right.
That's right. And then eventually it gets better and easier and easier and easier.
Yeah.
I also want to mention that sometimes, like kind of like your client, they're going to sabotage your recovery, right? So, you know, videotaping you with your new girlfriend or boyfriend is something like that, or interfering with new relationship. I had one person that the ex was trying to find where the new girlfriend's house was. Right? Like it's trying to ruin whatever you're moving, like what you're trying to make of your life. They're trying to ruin that.
It's amazing because I'm like, the energy that it takes to do some of these things, right? To stalk the new girlfriend, to do the drive-by of the houses, to spread the nasty rumors. Put that energy to being a good parent. Put that energy towards rebuilding your own new life. You know, it's really, it's a whole psychology 101 class that we could teach on, like, why waste this energy on me? You wanted to be away from me, so get away from me.
So I said to one client once, I said, just think of this person with no arms, because they just don't operate the same way. Like they're just so hardwired so differently than we are.
That's a good point, Karen, because I think, myself included, we also spend the energy trying to figure out this person. Why are you doing this? Why are you wasting this energy? And you're never going to understand it, because they do operate differently. You're totally right.
Yeah. So if you kind of, at the beginning, it's hard, but over time you're like, okay, like, of course. And we've talked about this before. You're like, predictably bad behaviors. They always, if you look back, even at your marriage, if you look back, like if I look at the post-divorce abuse that I've suffered, or however you want to say that, but it's always the same type of attacks. It's the same thing over and over. It's the legal drawn out stuff. It's the financial abuse. It's always the excuses. It's the victimhood. It's like, like it gets so old because it's always the same stuff. So they are kind of transparent after a while, like when you get kind of clearer on what their behaviors are going to be. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it can almost become amusing. You know what I mean? Like not that it's funny, but it's like, oh, here we go again, another court order. So I have to show up in court for another stupid hearing. Like and the courts get sick of it. You're wasting so many people's time and money that they really get frustrated with it. Seeing the same people over and over again for petty stuff. I mean, this isn't big. Some of it is. I'm just speaking from my own experience. Like going to court over the children's clothes, over extracurriculars, over, this stupid stuff that you should not. I mean, court should be reserved for the severe abuse, right? You would think. But some of these high conflict people use the courts, like you said, to draw out, because the court dates are never next week. It's always in 6 months. And then you're worrying about it the whole time, and, all of these things. So, but like you said, once it becomes a routine, you can predict, oh, this is what's going to happen.
And you can really lower your expectations, I just want to mention, like, my parents, when they went through their high conflict divorce, I also want to do the myth that when people are in high conflict, doesn't mean both people are high conflict.
Yeah.
Right? Because people assume it's both. It's not always both. It's just, if you have one, it's just hard to manage getting through a divorce with one high conflict, right? But my parents, and I'm not really sure the whole story, but I think they fought over pictures in court. And I think my dad dragged my mom in to court over pictures. So we're talking about really ridiculous things to fight for,
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen it on Instagram, but there was a picture of a couple getting down to the nitty gritty of their divorce settlement. And there was a pile of Beanie Babies on the floor, and they're arguing over which Beanie Baby belonged to who. And I'm just like, we can laugh at it now, but back in the day, those were like people's retirement.
Yeah, I know.
The Beanie Babies. Retire at Beanie Babies, but Yeah, and it's just like with your parents, okay, make a copy of the pictures. Like, you know what I mean? It just seems so simple sometimes to the outside world where it's like, what are we fighting about? You
Yeah.
know?
And sometimes these personalities, they're going to want everything anyways, and they'll fight for everything anyways.
Yeah.
So just be mindful of what really, really matters to you with these people, because for some, they just want everything, you know? So,
Well, and you mentioned that, and what comes to mind for me is the parents who fight for full custody, not because the child is in danger, but because they know that's a control method,
mhm,
right? The mom wants the kids, and so I'm going to take the kids from the mom. Not because there's any abuse or drugs or, violation of any type. It's because I can. And then when they get that full custody, what happens?
mhm,
They don't use it, right? Now they're
mhm.
calling mom every second to watch the kids. And it's never about the kids, it's about hurting the other person. When at the end of the day, who gets hurt? The kids,
Exactly, the kids.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, they can't really think that way though, do they? Another thing I want to mention, like they'll use legal loopholes.
Mm-hmm.
So like in my case, like I don't know, he just tried to find this loophole just to try to, and he's used it for years, this he thinks it's a loophole without proving the loophole. So I just want to mention that sometimes they will actually they'll try to figure out legal loopholes where they can get away with things. I just want to mention
Mm-hmm.
that because I went, yeah, that happens, right?
Yeah, and what I'm thinking, if there's people listening that are going through this and struggling, one of piece of advice is just if you're going to end up in court or whatever the situation may be, let them take you to court. I mean, what ended up happening in my case, and I don't know about your case, but it's like usually they're representing themselves because they're the smartest person in the room at all times, right? And they end up just spinning themselves into a corner. They're
Mm-hmm.
lying about their own lies that contradict each other. And so it's like, just let them keep
Mm-hmm.
talking because eventually the lawyers, the judges, the guardian ad litems, everyone's going to see they're painting, I say he, because mostly male, but there are females like this as well. I had a stepmom that was like this too. They're going to out themselves at
Mm-hmm.
some point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of between the loopholes, the court orders, the lies, the job, the lack of a job, whatever the case may be, they usually spin themselves right into negating
Mm-hmm.
everything that they have to say. I don't know if you experience that, but I've seen that quite a
I
few times.
do want to give them the advice also that they have been known to bully their own lawyer.
Yes.
So that was mine and still does, and it's been ridiculous some of the things like that I've received from his lawyer, where it's like my lawyer would say this is absolutely not even ethical.
Yeah.
So I just want to mention that, just be mindful that
Well, and usually they're
sometimes.
not hiring the best lawyers. You know what I mean? It's like either they're hiring somebody they're paying them to say whatever it is they want to say, or they're going to go through lawyers because the
Mhm.
good lawyers aren't going to put up with the bullshit that these people
Yeah,
spew. You
yeah,
know, I
yeah,
think that's a good point.
yeah. I also want to mention like another thing is sometimes they'll not communicate, so they'll withhold. So you have you have an issue going on with your child or co-parenting, and they'll just withhold. They won't even talk to you or address you, which
Hmm.
causes you anxiety and causes
Hmm.
uncertainty in that.
Yeah. I think that could go both ways though. What do you think about that? Because sometimes even being the non-high conflict
Hmm.
parent, you tend to withhold information because telling
Mm,
information is going to cause
true,
drama.
true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't want anyone listening to think, oh, I'm withholding information, so I must be the high conflict person,
No,
because
that's
I
not
have
what.
been
Yeah.
guilty of that myself where I'm like, you struggle with what to communicate because is this big enough of a deal to even, in a
True.
normal relationship, it shouldn't be, right? You should be able to communicate about your child. But with a high conflict person, everything is a chess move. So if I'm going to move this piece, what is that going to cause down the road?
Right. Yeah.
Right? Because everything is ammunition
Yeah.
to them.
And they want to manipulate as much as they can.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's all.
It's
I
hard.
had a whole list. I mean, we could go on and on. Do you have any, like, I mean, we've already talked about how we have to start regulating ourselves. We have to start working on ourselves. Do you have any good tips for anyone that when they're going through this, like we've been going through this?
Yeah, I would say looking back on my journey, it's great to have a support system, but you have to have the right support
Yeah.
system.
Mm-hmm.
And so finding a lawyer, a therapist, a divorce coach, a grief counselor that has experience with high conflict, I think is a must. Talking to your friends and family about your divorce, I think is a necessity to have that support system, but I would be leery to take advice from people who have not been in high conflict situations, because even if your sister or your best friend got divorced 5 years ago and they want to tell you what to do and they were in an amicable or semi-amicable relationship, that advice is not going to apply. And then like the things that you're saying that you're doing to protect yourself might sound crazy to them, and they might tell you, oh, you need to stop X, Y, and Z, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would just be careful of who you get your advice from or who you follow advice from, because unless it's somebody who's been in this situation, it's really hard to relate to.
Yeah. I also want to tell people that be careful when, you can have family and friends that actually enable your ex as well, right? So just be careful that, I also want, that's just one point. And the other one is the Facebook groups. Be mindful when you join them to make sure that they're empowering Facebook groups and they're not spiraling you down a path of, because it's hard enough. You can be angry and all that, but if it's just going to be all, you're going to come out of you're talking to these support people and it's okay, but you're still feeling like really, really, you want more empowering that you can get through this. It's just to be mindful that some of these groups can be, they're great in some ways and they're good advice, but in some ways, just be careful of who you're bonding with. That's the thing about peers. Like I love peer support, me and my peer support, but make sure, I had a friend that it was, we met at a divorce workshop, right? And that's great. But it's like, after years, it was like, okay, well, I can't keep thinking about that stuff anymore. And we're 5 years post, and I know we're both in it's still difficult, but I need to keep moving forward.
Yeah.
And so that relationship had to go because I could not handle it anymore. So I just wanted people to be mindful of that. Like to always be in the heaviness for years, it's a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that also goes back to the boundaries that we talked about. Certainly, I've had to end some relationships that were not healthy in my recovery from the divorce and from all of that. It's like if you're, people who send you messages, I saw your ex doing this. It's like, that's not helping me, or if they see my child out with my ex and like what they're doing, and that's not helping me move on, like you said. And some people do like to stay in the misery, and that's just kind of their what they hang on to. And if you're like that too and you guys can trauma bond, okay, great. But if you ever want to, like you said, move on from it, you really got to look out for yourself, which is really, again, uncomfortable for those of us who never put ourselves first.
Yeah. And I think the reason why we need to talk about this is I want people to be aware, if they're in the process or exploring the process, that this can actually happen, right?
Oh,
because
yeah.
I don't want people be like you and I, where I honestly didn't think this, like, are you crazy? This would never happen.
Oh, yeah.
And it has. And so I think awareness and educating yourself and understanding patterns of their behavior, and also as well as you said before, right, just kind of getting used to it and not reacting. Like we need to learn to emotionally regulate. And as you said, you're going to get, I got nasty letters, you probably got nasty letters. Cipher through them and only reply to what you need to, right? If it's about a child issue, pick up or something, but all the other stuff and how terrible you are, yeah, don't respond.
No response. No response is a response.
Yes, I agree with that. Does anybody have any questions before we wrap it up? If you do, just put in the comment. Anyways, any other tips I was trying to think of as well?
I do think educating yourself is a big one, because if you don't reach out or kind of investigate what you're going through, you can feel really alone, and you can feel like this is only happening to you. But the more that you look into narcissist abuse, post-divorce abuse, you probably tick off a lot of boxes that other people have gone through. And so, like you said, finding the right support, finding that you're not alone, is huge. And just educating yourself to know how to handle the situations, and that there are other people out there that have been through this that can help you.
Yeah, my last comment.
Everything. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Document everything. Yeah, you're correct. That's
my
really
clients
important.
get so sick of me because I'm like, did you document it? Did you document it?
Yeah, you have to document everything. Exactly. Good point. Another thing is one more thing is really, I know if you're the one leaving or left, whatever, know who you're divorcing. Like, it's in the workbook, right? Because it's like, I don't want people so naive. Like if they were difficult when you were married to them, then it might be difficult with you too. So just be aware of that, right? Like just know who you're divorcing, right? It's just something that I didn't even think about before. So
yeah, I mean, I think because we're in this world, we're so used to divorce, but when we have clients, this is the first time they're ever having to go through this. And so it's not second knowledge to them. It's the first time that they're dealing with any of this. And so, if this person was not easy to get along with while you're married, which obviously probably not if you're getting divorced, but it's going to be 10 times worse when you're getting divorced because they don't really have to care about your feelings. Even if they cared about your feelings a little bit, they no longer, are you the priority?
Right. It's just something that just to reflect when you're going through that, but a good point, right? Like we know the world too well now. And so it's all learning for everybody else that's going through it. But the support is out there, right? Like you or me or books or stuff. But anyways, do you have anything you want to tell anybody that you have something coming up? I know you have a great podcast.
Yes.
And
so I have my podcast, which today's episode is your, I won't say your better half, but your other half. Kirk, his episode's coming out today, and that is about parental alienation. So that's perfect timing if anybody wants to listen into that. That's going to be released within the hour, I think around 1:15, 1:30. And you can catch all the old episodes on there as well. And then I also have an ebook that I just released, which is just for those who are beginning their divorce journey and might not be ready to commit to coaching or anything like that. Kind of dip your toe into what to expect, how to handle it. There are a couple chapters about divorcing a narcissist in there. And so that's on my website if anybody is interested in that. I know you have your workbook, which is also a great tool.
Yeah, and it's on sale for all of divorce month.
Oh, great.
So get that. It's the same thing. It's just a good foundational tool, right? For everybody, because as you said, unless you've been through it, no one really knows how challenging it can be, right? So lots of help out there. And I was talking to another lady in Germany, and she made a good point. Like 30, 40 years ago, there was no, even 10 years ago, even when we were going through it, there was not the type of support systems that they have now. And when you're going through a high conflict, the support systems is necessary. They're almost like any type, not that you can afford everything, but just get some type of support systems in place.
Start somewhere.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I did, therapy for the longest time that was covered by my insurance, and just to have someone to talk to who can tell me you're not crazy, or, this is how you should be handling things, or just give me some perspective outside of my own head. I think it's whoever you rely on, just talk to somebody.
Yeah. You need it. Don't do it alone. I think is a really key point, because they're tough enough. You need the support system.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for coming on, Shauna. It was always wonderful. We'll have to book another live with you again soon.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and take care, everybody.
All right.
Okay,
See you later.
Bye-bye.